Some people and some cases are like a strange, slow-motion car crash. Unsure how those involved can't see that disaster is already in motion. This is very much one of those cases. The true story of Lucy McHugh. Lucy McHugh was a normal 12-year-old girl from Southampton, England. She lived with her mum Stacey and her mum's partner Richard. She was bright, bubbly, intelligent and always eager to learn. Her family called her Brains because she was so switched on. Lucy, who went to Redbridge Community School, loved playing with the babies in her family. She had her heart set on becoming a pro bono lawyer in the US, aiming to help people who could not afford to help themselves. Her school teacher said that at one stage she wanted to be a mechanic, then a fashion designer, but in the end she decided she wanted to study law. No one had any doubt in their mind that she would achieve it, because she was just Lucy. In May 2017, everything changed for Lucy. Stepdad Richard's friend, Stephen, was facing the prospect of being made homeless. So Richard did what any good friend may do, and invited Stephen to live with them, Stacey and Lucy, in Southampton. Stacey put in a good word at the care home where she worked and got Stephen a job there. It was an opportunity for him to have a fresh start and really turn his life around. Up until this point, life had been kind of hard for Stephen. He had spent a large part of his childhood in care, and at the age of 14, he was sentenced to 2 years in a Young Offenders Institute. During his time in the Young Offenders Institute for his crime, Stephen, along with 2 other inmates, barricaded themselves in the servery before causing thousands of pounds worth of damage and attacking staff with sharp kitchen implements. In adulthood, Stephen struggled to find a purpose. He became obsessed with reptiles and tattoos. He owned several snakes, and while he was not a tattoo artist, he would provide a tattooing service to anyone looking for a cut-price tattoo. Stephen was covered in artwork himself. A slight or skinny man, he made up for his lack of stature with his arguably impressive array of artwork, including a tattoo of the word freedom across his forehead. This made him a curiosity to 12-year-old Lucy. Stephen was 23, a grown man with an impressive collection of reptiles. It's easy to see how he may have captured the attention of someone her age. Lucy quickly developed a crush on Stephen, a crush that Stephen disturbingly did little to diminish. Instead of rebuffing her, keeping his distance, or indeed moving out, Stephen encouraged Lucy and sadly exploited her interest in him. To him, she was available in the same house, even in the bedroom opposite his, and he took full criminal, sick advantage. Notes written by Lucy told the full story of their relationship. Heartfelt and explicit, the notes give details of the loss of her virginity to Stephen in May 2017. The very same month he moved into her house. The notes described the repeated intercourse between them which followed, and the emotions which Lucy experienced throughout. Obviously, we know that this wasn't a relationship, it was simply In one note, Lucy tells Nicholson that whatever this is between them has to end, but it did not. Unbeknownst to her parents, Lucy was used by Stephen from the moment he set foot in the family home. Her stepfather's best friend was grooming her, from the very moment he was able to get close enough. Over the course of 14 months, Lucy became a shadow of her former self. In Lucy's young and immature eyes, she was in a relationship. Stephen was her boyfriend, and she made no secret of this to her friends. Hearing reports from other pupils, Lucy's teachers were naturally concerned. Although Lucy denied any intimate relationship to her teachers, they immediately did the right thing, referring their concerns to the local multi-agency safeguarding hub, first of all in 2017, and then again after Lucy had moved to a different school in 2018. On both occasions, a team had investigated and found nothing to be concerned about. No action was taken. By May 2018, Lucy told her cousin that her relationship with Stephen had now become a terrible burden. He was violent and she was scared of him. Lucy and Stephen were often arguing in the house, and while Lucy's mother and stepfather were aware of the fights, they put it down to teenage angst. The pair just didn't get on, is what they told themselves. Given her age, it was normal to be withdrawn or secretive, right? In this case, wrong. Eventually, the arguments were too hard to ignore, and Lucy's stepfather asked Stephen Nicholson to leave. Something wasn't right, and he knew it. On the day Stephen moved out, Lucy told Richard that he had something she needed to tell him and her mother later that night. But Stacey didn't return home until Lucy had gone to sleep. The moment had passed. A couple of days after moving out, Stephen left work early. He claimed to be suffering from sickness and diarrhea. Working in a care home that looked after the elderly, Stephen knew that he would not be allowed back to work until 48 hours after the last symptoms had presented themselves. But Stephen wasn't actually ill. He was simply buying himself time. On Wednesday the 25th of July 2018, Lucy left her house at 9 a.m. A CCTV camera at the local Tesco shows Lucy walking across the car park at 9:30 a.m, just half an hour after she left home in a white top and camouflage leggings. She had no phone, but she can be seen walking purposefully, glancing down at her watch. She didn't want to be late to wherever it was she was going. A woman walking her dog in the sports centre grounds around 10 a.m. recalled seeing a girl matching Lucy's description heading towards the top of the cricket pitch. But Lucy never made it home. When she wasn't home later that evening, her parents began to worry. They phoned the police, who launched a missing persons investigation. And the next morning, Stephen comforted Stacey and Richard. They were obviously growing increasingly concerned for their missing daughter. Stephen sent a text message to Stacey saying, "I hope they find her safe. Police are good at their job and they will find her soon. Keep your chin up and stay positive." But the police would not find Lucy safe and well. Just hours later, her body was discovered. Lucy describes the harrowing moment she was informed of her daughter's death. "I felt the blood turn to ice inside my veins. The room began to spin, and I had the sudden urge to vomit. I dashed from the room, feeling like my whole world was about to implode. I couldn't breathe." On the 26th of July 2018, a dog walker found Lucy's body at the Southampton Outdoor Sports Centre. She had been attacked with a sharp implement until she was no longer breathing. The police didn't wait around. Stephen was arrested on suspicion of her murder the day after the body had been found. His arrest sparked one of the biggest evidence searches in UK criminal history. They trawled through thousands of hours of CCTV footage in the local area, all to piece together his movements in the day before. On Tuesday the 24th of July, he phoned in sick to work. He told the office that he had sickness and diarrhea. He knew that it was company policy for carers to remain off for 48 hours after the last symptoms had passed. But Nicholson was not sick, at least not in that meaning of the word. That afternoon, he cycled up to the flat of an elderly man whom he knew in Curzon Court, a home situated right beside the sports centre where Lucy was found. He was there for around 3 hours. There, he ordered a pair of new trainers for delivery first thing the next morning. That evening, he messaged Lucy on Facebook Messenger, but he deleted the messages soon after reading them. We'll never find out what those final messages read. At 8:15 a.m. on Wednesday, Nicholson cycled from his mother's home to the flat at Curzon Court, arriving at 8:30 a.m. At around 9 a.m, he took a trip to the nearby Tesco Express. He then met Lucy at the sports centre. CCTV unfortunately fell short here, but the police strongly suspected that Nicholson took her into the woods to the side of the top cricket pitch. Lucy told Stephen that she was pregnant and the baby was his. We can assume this was the given reason for the meeting, and there, deep in the foliage off of the beaten path, he attacked her. She was found with 27 markings to her body, most to the face and neck. The pathologist noticed that Lucy had some stab wounds on her arms and wrists. These could have been defensive wounds, as if she was desperately trying to protect herself. There was one unusual incised wound right across her wrist, as if the murderer had initially tried to make it look as if Lucy had done this to herself. Damage to the carotid artery led to sudden high-pressure blood loss, then unconsciousness, and very soon after that, her demise. After he had ended her, Nicholson returned to the flat at Curzon Court before cycling home. During questioning, Stephen admitted to detectives that he had corresponded with Lucy via Facebook Messenger. When police attempted to gain access to his Facebook account, it became apparent that he changed the passwords in the day prior to his arrest. He refused to hand over his new password. Officers were now at a loss. There was no DNA evidence at this point, and they could only hold him for 96 hours without charging him. They turned to a piece of legislation often used when dealing with terrorists, Section 53 of the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, or RIPA as it's commonly known. Stephen was bailed in relation to Lucy's murder, but charged again under RIPA for failing to hand over his Facebook password. He then went to trial at Southampton Crown Court, where he was sentenced to 14 months in prison for not handing over his password. This sentence bought police the time they needed to continue their investigation. Stephen had been very careful to cover his tracks. The police knew that they had their man, but there was no physical evidence or DNA linking him to the scene. The police turned to a cloud data analyst to study the location of Stephen's phone on the morning of Lucy's death. They didn't have the physical phone. This too had strangely disappeared before his arrest, but they didn't need it. They were able to pull location data from the cloud. This investigation showed Stephen had been in the vicinity where Lucy's body had been discovered. This was obviously exactly what they expected. It also showed that he deviated from the most direct route back to his house, stopping off at Tanner's Brook on his way home. Police immediately launched a fingertip search of the area. There they found a bag of partially burnt clothing, including a blood-soaked hoodie. It contained Stephen's and Lucy's DNA. They knew they finally had the evidence to charge their man. On the 18th of July 2019, Stephen was found guilty of Lucy's murder as well as 3 counts of violating her. The judge didn't hold back as she delivered the sentence. She was a 13-year-old child. Your selfishness and savagery have blighted her family's lives forever. The sentence is one of life in prison. Stephen was sentenced to life imprisonment and told he would serve a minimum of 33 years behind bars. He was also given 17-year concurrent prison sentences for each of the violation charges that he faced. It's unlikely he will ever see freedom again. This is the true story of Louise Smith, a young woman that was entering the adult world, and that hadn't had the easiest start in life. In tough times, it can be hard to know who to trust, so when Louise left the house one day, but never came back, where would the police even begin to look? What had become of Louise? Louise Smith was pretty much like any other 16-year-old girl. She loved animals and being outdoors. She was studying to become a veterinarian. She was a smiley, bubbly person who loved her family, but she also had her struggles. Louise was battling with depression and anxiety. Social workers had monitored Louise for some time, and they had put her on a child in need plan. This was due to the constant risk of domestic maltreatment and neglect. She was bubbly, but she was also impressionable and vulnerable. She often had arguments with her mother over her desire for more independence. After falling out with her mother, she had been living with her cousin, also known as CJ. and her husband Shane in the Lee Park area of Havant. They were younger than her mum, both 29 years old, but they were old enough to be responsible for her, and initially it was a good fit. She called them her aunt and uncle, and they got on well. For a 16-year-old that desperately wanted independence, this might just be the perfect solution. But unfortunately, the perfect solution didn't stay perfect for long. On May the 7th, 2020, Louise had had enough. The United Kingdom was under lockdown due to the pandemic, so Louise was unable to live the independent lifestyle that she so desired. She texted her friends saying that she needed to leave her aunt and uncle's home. She described the couple as vile and explained that they treated her like a child. She also alleged that Shane had acted inappropriately. She felt he was attempting to flirt with her on several occasions. This made her uncomfortable and she didn't know how to handle him. She recorded Shane on her mobile phone as evidence to send to her friends. In the video, he can be seen tickling her feet. So enough was enough, and Louise decided yet again to leave her home. Still not on talking terms with her mum, she turned to a friend, Samantha Bird. She explained the situation to Samantha. She then offered Louise a place to stay, and even said that she would allow her boyfriend Bradley to live with her too. This proposition seemed appealing to both Louise and Bradley, and it was almost a done deal. When CJ learned of this, she reached out to Louise to make amends. She was incredibly persistent. CJ attempted to make contact with Louise over 50 times and eventually she gave in. Louise, CJ and Shane managed to talk it through. They resolved the situation and Louise decided to stay. With everything sorted, they decided to celebrate with a drink. Louise and Shane went to the local shops. Shane bought the alcohol and the two walked back to the house together. Louise began drinking. She wasn't in the best mindset. She desperately wanted a friend to stay with her that night. So eventually her boyfriend Bradley went to the flat. He couldn't stay over, but he chatted with Louise, CJ and Shane for a little while. There was some discussions about Louise disliking the way Shane was speaking to her, saying he was actually flirting. It was relatively light-hearted and Bradley wasn't concerned when he decided to leave. He made plans to meet Louise the next day at around 3 p.m. Hopefully the hangover wouldn't be too bad. Later that night, she messaged some of her friends, saying that she was so drunk that she'd passed out. She also contacted a mental health helpline. Louise told the person that she was struggling with the lockdown, and that she was thinking of doing harm to herself. At some point after 3 a.m, she finally managed to fall asleep. The next day, Friday the 8th of May 2020, was VE Day in the UK. It was also in the middle of a nationwide lockdown. There wasn't much going on for anyone. When 3 p.m. came around, Bradley made his way over to CJ and Shane's house to meet Louise. When he arrived, he was greeted by CJ. CJ told him that Louise had gone out for the day, but had not yet returned. Bradley pulled out his mobile phone and made several attempts to contact Louise, but he had no luck. At around 4 p.m, Shane returned home. Bradley then asked him if he had seen Louise anywhere on his way. He had seen Louise only a few hours before. Shane explained that he had walked with Louise to a park before leaving her to go and visit his mother. He said that she had gone to see some of her friends, but that he hadn't heard or seen from her since. Bradley began to worry. Over the next few hours, he tried relentlessly to get in touch with her. However, she was unable to be contacted. Everyone close to her knew of her current mental state. They knew that she had been struggling with her mental health. They were growing worried about what she may have done. By that point, Louise was past her 6 p.m. curfew that was imposed by her aunt. At 6:32 p.m, CJ made a call to the emergency services to report Louise as missing. A search was soon underway to find her. As a 16-year-old girl, the police knew that the best way to find her would be through her mobile phone. Louise's phone records told a somber story. The last contact Louise had made was with a friend via Snapchat at around 12:50 p.m. The phone calls that Bradley made were picked up by multiple phone masts. These covered the Havant Thicket area. However, at around 4 p.m, her iPhone died and disconnected from the mobile phone network. They knew that her phone hadn't left the area, but it was also unusual for Louise to let the battery completely die. The police turned to those who had seen her last. Both Shane and CJ were questioned and asked where they had last seen Louise, but strangely, Shane changed the story that he had told CJ and Bradley. Instead of telling them he'd walked Louise to the park, he told the police that he walked to Tesco with Louise on the 8th of May, before she then left to see some friends. This was a small change, but one that the police picked up on. If one small detail can change, maybe the entire story will follow suit. The police also learned that Louise was thinking of moving out, and that CJ was keen to make her stay. They also discovered that Shane had been flirting and acting inappropriately towards Louise. These facts, along with Shane's story that didn't add up, made the police incredibly suspicious of the couple. As the search continued, police revisited the house several times. Each time, Shane Mays barely had a word to say to the police officers. He told them that he and Louise got on well. He also made another comment, strangely asking police if he could lock Louise in a bedroom if she returned. On another occasion, he told officers that he had searched a number of places for the teenager. He also claimed on one instance that after he had walked to Tesco with Louise, he then watched her walk away up near Billy Lawn Avenue. He walked police along the route he claimed to have walked. He and the police were all picked up on CCTV doing this. But on footage from the 8th of May, he was not seen on a CCTV with Louise walking this same route. This raised the question for the police. Why would he lie? What was he hiding? On the 15th of May 2020, the couple were arrested on suspicion of kidnapping. Louise's family and friends remained hopeful that she would return, but unfortunately, this wasn't the case. On the 21st of May 2020 at 11:45 a.m, a body was found by search teams about 40 meters off the track in the woods. The body had been torched. It was barely recognizable as a result of the injuries sustained. Injuries which included repeated heavy blows to the head. The body was confirmed to be Louise. Upon discovery, several sticks were found piled on top of Louise's body. This was said to have been done in an attempt to fuel a fire. A lighter was also found at the scene. In total, there were 19 separate injuries to Louise. A pathologist was unable to conclude which of them was fatal. This was no longer a missing person or even a kidnap. This was murder. The police theorized that Shane had lured Louise into the wooded area, and he had then attempted to force himself on her. But when this didn't work and Louise began to scream, he attacked her to stop her from making any further noise. He then defiled her body and started the fire. With no evidence linking CJ to the crime, she was released. Her hearing was held on July the 15th at Winchester Crown Court. Shane pleaded not guilty to the murder of Louise at his trial, which was set after his plea. However, on the first day of the trial on November the 17th, 2020, Shane admitted to killing her, but claimed it was an accident, and he pleaded guilty to manslaughter instead of murder. The prosecution team gave a detailed account of Louise's injuries. They also showed CCTV footage of Shane leaving the crime scene. DNA evidence belonging to Shane was found on a stick which he had inserted into Louise. On the stand, Shane claimed that Louise had asked him to go there with her for a conversation, and that they made their way into the wooded area where they began to argue. He alleges she picked up a big stick and hit him on the side. He said this hurt, so he grabbed it off of her and threw it on the floor. He then struck her in the face, repeatedly. Shane explains that she fell to the ground on the second punch, and that he then couldn't stop himself. When she was on the ground, punches continued to rain down. He couldn't say how many times he struck her, but he said he heard her bones crack. He says that when he walked away, he could still hear her moaning, claiming she was still alive. Shane denied that he intended to end Louise. He tried to push the idea that he'd simply lost control. When questioned as to why he created a hole in Louise's stomach and then inserted a stick inside and then set her on fire, he claimed that he did no such thing. His defense claimed that somebody else must have come along and done these things to the body. When asked why he lied to the police, Shane claimed that he had not intended to purposely lie about what had happened. He believed at the time that what he was saying was true, and that he simply didn't remember correctly. Shane has an IQ of 63. He's in the 0.1 bottom percentile for memory range. This mounted part of his defense. Just a quick note from me, his IQ is less than that of a dolphin, but on we go. Thankfully, the jury saw through this defense. The prosecution team highlighted the savagery of the attack and told the jury, even when he saw the blood and heard the cracks, he carried on. The shattering of her facial bones, the total separation of the jawbone from her facial skull. Shane Mays was found guilty of murder. He gave little reaction as he found out the news. In a victim statement, Louise's mother described her daughter as strong-willed, happy and smiley, who had the whole world to look forward to. When speaking to Shane in court, she said, "You killed her in such a traumatic way, and what you did afterwards is beyond words. You damaged her so badly I didn't even have a chance to say goodbye, to hold her hand, or even kiss her." Shane was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 25 years. In January of 2021, a solicitor referred the sentence to the Crown Court of Appeals. This solicitor considered the sentence to be far too low. Sadly, this appeal was rejected. The front door was locked. There were no sounds, no signs of life, and something just wasn't right. Out-of-state relatives hadn't heard from 20-year-old Alyssa Shippey in months. In fact, not since November. It was now nearly summer. So on a warm afternoon in May of 2025, Broken Arrow police served a search warrant at a small home on West Roanoke Street. What they found inside would leave attending officers needing intense therapy for years to come.
Daddy!
In 2021, Rodney and Lisa Shippey bought their family home on West Roanoke Street. It was modest, one story, plain sidings, and a backyard that was just big enough. Lisa worked in the school system, and Rodney had a steady job too. And despite the challenges of raising two kids, one of whom had significant needs, neighbours say that they seemed like a loving and normal family. Alyssa was in her late teens, and Logan was just starting to communicate non-verbally by using gestures and videos. He had a YouTube account where he posted clips of garage doors opening and closing, and this was just his favourite thing in the world. It's kind of irrelevant now, but when I find information, I'd like to share it. Rodney also had a YouTube account with just one video on it. It was uploaded on January the 9th, 2015, and it was from a Katy Perry concert. I didn't really have him down as a Katy Perry fan, but there we go. I want to talk more about Lisa and the dynamics within their Shippey house, to try and understand the conditions that could have combined and then led her to do what she eventually did. It is kind of tough because there's no clear first-hand record, and there's no note from Lisa, but there are some very possible factors at play. Those closest to Lisa have said that she'd been struggling with depression for a long time, and raising Logan was not easy. And believe me, I am in no way laying on any level, not a single ounce of responsibility at Logan's door, but I have compiled a little research of what a situation like this could be like. Raising a non-verbal autistic child can present profound challenges. According to the NHS, children on the autism spectrum often use limited or no speech and rely on alternate communications, things like gestures or speaking devices. And we know that Logan fits this diagnosis. Without adequate support, the child may experience severe anxiety and meltdowns, often seen when overwhelmed, a situation that isn't easy for the caregivers. They're often bound to consistent routines and keeping certain sensory conditions. And in this instance, in this home, Lisa was struggling. And if Lisa was struggling, things could snowball very quickly. Logan was nonverbal, he had autism, and he needed near constant supervision, a situation that would be tough for anyone, even if they were in perfect mental health. And Lisa did 100% totally adore him, but it was still exhausting. This video from March 2022, taken from Logan's YouTube channel, I believe features Lisa having a discussion with another woman about how they were handling Logan's non-verbal communication. It sounds like they were really trying to help him out.
Well, maybe the psychologist or whoever he's seeing, the therapist said, let him reply to some of your things. Don't.
Yeah. And Ronnie took the initiative yesterday, well, because I told him to, but he took the initiative to text him first, and then everything after that was Ronnie.
And also thrown into the mix was the rest of the family too. Alyssa was nearing adulthood, and she was trying to carve out her own life while still helping out at home. But perhaps Lisa was receiving less help than normal from Alyssa, but again, this is nobody's fault. We can just imagine that it was a tough situation. Something else I'm sure didn't help was the fact that Rodney worked long hours. Sometimes he would leave Lisa to juggle both kids on her own. And let's not rule out just how difficult a teenager can sometimes be. And so, behind closed doors, those pressures mounted. And in August of 2022, something sadly broke. Lisa ended her own time on this earth, in the very same home where Logan had played with toys on the carpet, where Alyssa had decorated her room with posters and fairy lights, where husband Rodney had kissed his wife goodbye for the last time and didn't even know it. Lisa's demise was the first major blow to the family, but what followed was a slow descent that nobody outside of the home could have fully seen. Rodney didn't just collapse overnight. To co-workers and neighbours, he still seemed functional. But family members did notice a change. He stopped answering text messages. He began giving vague updates about how the kids were doing. And when he did talk to people, his tone was now flat. Alyssa had been taking online classes, but she withdrew. She told a few people that she just needed a break. No one knew that break would stretch into an ongoing silence. And Logan, once visible in the yard, or going on walks with his father, was now almost never seen at all. The house grew quiet, almost too quiet, and the grief, rather than fading, it seemed to harden. Rodney began pushing everyone away, perhaps trying to protect what little he had left. But isolation made nobody in that house safer. It only made what would come next invisible. Things only got worse. 5 months after Lisa's end, another tragedy struck the family. This time it was Lisa's mother, Diane Carpenter. In January of 2023, police were called to a home in South Broken Arrow after someone reported a disturbance. When they arrived, they found Diane in the kitchen. She was no longer breathing after a sharp force attack. Her husband, Kenny, had barricaded himself inside the home. He refused to come out. Officers tried to negotiate, and this standoff lasted for 4 hours. However, it ended with a single shot. Kenny now ended his own time on this earth as well. On January the 21st, 2023, Alyssa posted to Facebook, "I miss you, Grandma." Now within the space of just 5 months, Alyssa and Logan had lost both their mother and their grandparents. Rodney had lost his wife and his in-laws. The psychological fallout was heavy, and now all of the weight of the family fell on his shoulders. Rodney reportedly never spoke of Diane's death again. Family say he distanced himself even further. He made no memorial posts. He wrote no obituary. It was as if the family was disappearing one person at a time. They were disappearing from the outside world and also from memory as they further closed off. By the spring of 2023, Rodney and the kids were still in the West Roanoke home. However, the lights were now mostly off. The windows pretty much stayed closed, and whatever was happening inside, nobody would know until it was far too late. Logan Shippey wasn't a boy that many people knew by name, but if you lived on West Roanoke, you would know of him. He was the kid who loved to visit neighbours' driveways, just to watch their garage doors go up and down. He didn't talk. He didn't knock at people's doors. He just stood there mesmerised. Some people found it odd at first, but once they realised who he was, most welcomed him in. One neighbour even installed a smart opener so that Logan could trigger it whenever he wanted with a phone app. He'd smile when the doors moved. He'd film it and then watch it again and again. He even had a small YouTube channel, and it mostly featured videos of garage doors and some silent tours of places that he found interesting. But sometime after his mother passed, those videos slowed down. But then in early 2025, we got some new glimpses into the Shippey household. This video from January 2025 features both Rodney and Logan as they watch a neighbour's garage door in motion. It sounds like Rodney, at this time, was still maintaining a level of care for Logan as he mentions going home to eat.
You have a good night, Ben.
I will. Go put down.
Okay, he's gonna go down.
Wait, Papa, let me get out.
Be careful to get down. Alright, we gotta go.
Okay. Logan, come on in if you want to.
No, he's gonna go inside. He's gotta go eat too.
Hey,
Hi.
push the button for Logan. That's what he's waiting on.
push the button.
Push the button.
Thank you, buddy. Yes, yes. You too.
Then in March of 2025, it was a walkthrough of the inside of his home. It was only a short video, a little shaky. It was filmed from his point of view, but what it showed alarmed his relatives. There were piles of trash, flooring seemingly torn up in parts, animals weaving throughout the home. It was clear that although the house still stood, the home had now collapsed, and nobody had been inside to see it, until that is, Logan quietly filmed it for the world. Alyssa was now 20 years old. She was bright and funny, and she was online a lot like most people her age. She loved anime and had dreams of working with animals. She last updated her Facebook profile picture on August the 8th, 2023. Her online activity slowly tailed off. She used to text with her cousin Patty every few days, but sometime in the fall of 2024, she stopped replying. Patty assumed that she was just busy, or maybe even depressed. After all, the family had been through so much, but as the months passed, concern began to grow. When people went to Rodney for answers about his daughter, he would give inconsistent answers. To one person, he said that Alyssa had moved in with some friends, and to another he said that she was dealing with health issues. One neighbour was even told that she had cancer, and Rodney even accepted money to help with her treatment for that cancer. But no one had seen Alyssa, nobody either online or in real life. Notably, Alyssa also didn't show up in any of Logan's candid videos. By March of 2025, nearly 5 months had passed without a confirmed sighting. Patty tried to reach out again, but again she got no answer. She asked some local friends to check in on the home, but nobody could get through. It was then that someone sent her Logan's most recent video. This was that video showing the interior of the home. Patty was now firmly convinced that something was very wrong.
Yeah. I could be the ball, Lord. Go happy the doing. Oh my God. Just the doing. Dryer. doing washing. It's going out as well. He's had doors. He washes. Go back to the backyard. The story. The go over there. Go through a back door.
I'm gonna show you something. No, I'm gonna show you something right now.
We
Not gonna believe. I just need to grab my laptop and do it.
will have the bathroom. Bathroom. We have fan. This is slippery. This beginning. I have to visit.
Okay, here we go.
This is this the door. I have pantry. You have that sink, the water. You can go over there. You have pantry more, the hammer. And then I have bedroom. You can go to a. You gotta go to the bedroom.
I knew you would. Oh, take a picture. Okay, hold on, buddy. Let me take a picture
bedroom.
of this real quick. Okay, I got
Go
it.
to the bedroom. You see? You will go to the closet. You can have a bedroom. This go to the closet. Closet here. Take a money.
A missing persons report was finally filed in May, and not because anyone knew anything had actually happened. It was mainly because Rodney's stories were no longer being believed. Broken Arrow police attended the home on a welfare check. However, Rodney didn't answer the door. He just said that Alyssa was resting and that they didn't need anything. So instead, officers moved to get a search warrant. Logan's final upload to YouTube was on the 25th of May 2025. It's honestly just a heartbreaking watch. From my point of view, what we're seeing is a 10-year-old Logan living in squalor and trying to find methods of stimulation. The whole video is over 20 minutes long. It's almost all shot from Logan's point of view. He plays with some toys, he has some screen time, he pushes some buttons. There's a whole load of sound effects, some crude animations, and at one point he films Father Rodney. It appears Rodney is reading or typing on an iPad whilst he's sat at the kitchen table. Logan tries to get his attention, but Rodney dismisses him.
Daddy. Hey. Oh my God. It's kind of fun.
What stands out to me about that is in the earlier videos, we hear Lisa trying to figure out how to get Logan to communicate better, and in this instance he actually uses his voice, but Rodney doesn't want to listen. I really hated watching this, and to be honest, I wish I hadn't tried so hard to find Logan's channel. And I know this is a spoiler, but what a god-awful way to spend your last days on Earth. The next update in this story is just 3 days later. And then on May the 28th, 2025, they entered the home with legal authority. What they found inside, Rodney, Logan, the family dog, was already horrifying. But it was what they missed at first, a hidden body in the corner of a dark, trash-strewn room that turned this from a crime into something far worse. This was a long silent cry for help that nobody heard in time. It seems that Rodney had many secrets, and in January of 2025, US Bank filed a foreclosure notice against Rodney for $135,000 in unpaid principal. Court documents show that he had until June to respond, but Rodney never filed, he never showed up, he never even called to try and sort it out. Nobody had any idea that the home was in foreclosure, because Rodney hadn't told anyone. From the outside, the yard did look neglected, but nobody could have guessed just how far south everything could have gone. The mailbox now filled up, deliveries sat untouched on a doorstep, and inside, a final act had already unfolded. There was no witnesses, no outreach, and nobody left to intervene. By the time police showed up for the second time, it was already over. Officers were not prepared for what they saw. Inside the home, there was no running water, there were no clean surfaces. Trash and broken furniture was now piled in nearly every room. The floors were sticky, and the air was thick with the smell of rot and pet waste. Much of the house sat in near total darkness. Investigators found Rodney first. He met his end at his own hands. He was the one that pulled the trigger, and horrifically, next to him was Logan. He was also gone. Their dog nearby was also deceased. At this time, Alyssa was still missing. It wasn't until officers returned with more lights and equipment that they realized something else was wrong. There were too many indicators, too many belongings, too much evidence that someone else had been living in the home. And then eventually, they saw it, tucked behind a collapsed pile of furniture and trash. In a dank room with no working electricity, they found a third body. It was a young woman. She was too degraded for immediate ID. However, the family already knew this was Alyssa.
Breaking news.
It all started with a call from someone out of state worried about the whereabouts of their family member, Alyssa Shippey. When police showed up to this house in Broken Arrow serving a warrant, they walked in and found tragedy.
Our hearts go out to the family and friends and neighbors of the people involved in this incident this afternoon. Anytime we lose somebody in our community, it's a tragedy.
Investigators initially found 2 people and a dog all dead, calling it an apparent murder-suicide. One man who apparently shot himself, a juvenile male and a dog. Officers would not say what caused the death of the others. Later on in the investigation, they also found the dead body of a woman. They would not reveal her identity nor her cause of death. We're told investigators plan to be on scene for several more hours. Details are limited this early in the investigation, but 2 News will work tirelessly to get more. In Broken Arrow, Brody Myers, 2 News, Oklahoma.
The medical examiner would later confirm the identity. By this stage, the story had already reached the public. The home where Lisa had met her end in 2022 now held 3 more bodies. The last 3 Shippies, all gone, and all within the same 4 walls. So just to hammer this home and just to be crystal clear, the majority or possibly all of the videos that Logan recorded within the home, he did so whilst his sister was laying, decomposing in the next room. When we saw Rodney sitting at the kitchen table, he knew where Alyssa was and what state she was in. Truly, truly unthinkable.
But I spoke with family member Patty Williams, who says it is Alyssa.
This whole story is just such a tragedy on so many multiple levels.
Yeah, it's horrible. He seemed to be holding it together as best as he could, months after she passed. But then he just started to estrange himself from everybody.
Neighbors who describe Logan as autistic and nonverbal say they often saw him play outside. He loved meeting with them. But no one had seen Alyssa since at least December. Patty hadn't talked to any of them either.
It's not abnormal for Ronnie to kind of distance himself from everybody. So when I didn't hear from them, I didn't think anything of it because he's done this before.
Patty and several of the neighbors tell me Logan loved garage doors. In fact, he would be out here a lot asking the neighbors if they would open and close it for them, and they did oblige. He also took a lot of YouTube videos. It was, in fact, one of his YouTube videos that alerted family to what was going on inside.
Not suitable for a child. There was no running water. There was trash in the house. The house looked like a completely different house.
Patty would later learn Rodney had been telling various stories, including telling neighbors that Alyssa had cancer.
And they would send money to help. Alyssa did not have cancer.
Patty now just wants the community to see and remember their faces of lives lost too soon.
Logan was so smart, eager to learn. Everybody that met him loved him, so he was everybody's Logan. Alyssa was such a bright person in the world, and she had such a beautiful life ahead of her, and I just feel like their lives were just stolen from them.
We don't know exactly what happened to Alyssa, and in a way I think she has the darkest story here. The Broken Arrow Police Department stated that a medical examiner would determine the official reason that her time came to an end, but as of now, no official ruling or autopsy results have been publicly released. What is strongly implied, however, based on the state of decomposition, the lack of visible trauma reports, and the home's unsanitary, abandoned-like condition, is that Alyssa must have passed months earlier, possibly from neglect, from untreated illness, possibly starvation, or maybe other non-violent causes, though again this is unconfirmed. Relatives, including Patty Williams, already believed that Rodney had been lying about Alyssa's whereabouts and condition, and we know that at one point he claimed that she had cancer, so maybe she was already ill, or maybe she was already gone. But either way, these deceptions suggest that Rodney concealed her passing for some time, either out of denial, out of mental anguish, or to avoid intervention. Hopefully in time we will get the answers, but there is a chance that the remains were already too degraded. We don't know exactly when Rodney made his decision. There were no notes found. There were no text messages sent. There were no final phone calls. But at some point, the father who had once tried to hold his family together chose to be the one to put an end to his entire family's story. We all have family spats at one time or another. Most of them just blow over in a few hours or days. After all, blood is thicker than water, right? But during a time of intense family conflict, when a father's dark, disgusting secret is discovered by his sons, it can spark a new level of hatred, one that threatens to fan the flames until this burning issue becomes an out-of-control, raging fire. It's only a matter of time until the whole thing burns to the ground. Dylan Redwine was born on the 6th of February 1999. He grew up in the idyllic town of Bayfield in southern Colorado. It's in the Durango area, a small tight-knit community and the perfect place to raise a family. At least it was for Dylan's parents, Mark and Elaine. They'd been married since 1989, and over the course of their 18-year marriage, they had 2 boys together, Dylan and his older brother, Corey, who was born in 1992. The 2 brothers were adventurous at heart. They grew up exploring the outdoors. Dylan idolized his older brother. They were incredibly close and got on well. But then again, Dylan pretty much got on well with everyone. Even as a child, he had an infectious energy that was difficult to ignore. By 13 years old, he was witty, compassionate, and had dreams as big as the Colorado sky. From the outside, he had everything going for him. Great friends, a great family, a great life ahead of him. But the picture-perfect family wasn't so perfect behind closed doors. Father Mark had a job as a foreman with United Pipeline and often worked away. This possibly led to the fact that Elaine felt the marriage had run its course. In 2007, she filed for divorce. It's safe to say that Mark didn't take it too well. If he was unhappy, then everyone else was going to be unhappy too, and he made sure to make the divorce as difficult as possible. Mother Elaine got full custody of her 2 sons, and she then very quickly moved 300 miles away to Colorado Springs. Mark had visitation rights, but he didn't really use them. With his marital relationship now in the toilet, Mark's relationship with the boys fell apart too. Corey and Dylan's relationship with their dad became strained, and although they still had friends back in their hometown, they didn't spend a huge amount of time going back there. In 2010, they saw a side of Mark they had rarely seen before, a pretty angry and violent one after witnessing a fight between their parents. And from there, they chose not to visit him again. However, sadly, Dylan was still a minor. This means that he was forced to spend his court-ordered visits with his father. One of these visits was due for Thanksgiving in 2012. Dylan didn't want to go, but he didn't have a choice. His older brother Corey was 20 years old at this point, and no longer under the control of the courts or his parents. Corey didn't have to see his father, so he simply chose not to. This means it would just be Dylan, alone, going to visit his dad. But Dylan was scared of his dad and he didn't want to be left alone with him. However, this was only due to be a short trip. A get in, get out and suck it up kind of arrangement. At least that's what he told himself. On the 18th of November 2012, 13-year-old Dylan Redwine hopped on a plane. He flew from Colorado Springs to Durango La Plata Airport. Father Mark picked up Dylan at the airport and off they went home. He asked if he could crash with a friend that evening, that is, instead of staying at home with his dad. However, this idea was shot down. Instead, Dylan arranged to visit his friend's house early the next morning at 6:30 a.m. The next morning came, now the 19th. Father Mark left to run some errands. He wasn't used to having a 13-year-old in the house, and he had to pick up some bits and bobs from the supermarket. When he left, he said Dylan was sleeping on the couch. He came back a couple of hours later and said Dylan was gone. He assumed he'd gone to see his friend as planned. After all, he hadn't seen his friends for quite some time, so this really did make sense. But hours later, he tried to get a hold of Dylan, but couldn't. He still hadn't come home and he wasn't answering his phone. Mark started ringing around and nobody had seen or even heard from his son. The friend that he'd arranged to meet at 6:30 a.m. that morning said he hadn't turned up. When he texted him at 6:46 a.m. asking where he was, he received no response. This means Dylan had just disappeared. Unsure what to do and out of his depth, Mark started texting his ex-wife, who was immediately concerned. This was her baby, and she was helpless, stuck miles away in Colorado Springs. While Mark's first thought was that he'd run off in a mood, he assumed that he would just come back when he was hungry, but Elaine didn't think that this sounded like her Dylan. He wouldn't run away, and if he did, he would have called his mum. At 5:30, Dylan's mother, 300 miles away, filed a missing persons report before setting off for her ex-husband's home. Police immediately started looking for Dylan. Hundreds of volunteers came out in full force. Police, helicopters, divers, everyone was on the lookout. The mountains were checked, the woods, the area near Mark's home, but nothing. A bloodhound from Albuquerque went out with a task force. Bloodhounds can pick up a scent up to 6 weeks after an event, but even a hound couldn't find a sign of Dylan. Everyone was searching for Dylan, except his father. According to Elaine and Corey, Mark was sticking to his guns that his 13-year-old son had simply run away. He was just acting out. Whilst everyone else scoured the area, Mark was just chilling out on a couch, having a beer, watching the football. But about 2 weeks after the disappearance, a runaway was ruled out due to the surrounding circumstances. A lack of cell phone activity, his friends texting him to no response, no contact with his mum, and not having taken any of his belongings with him. Dylan hadn't run away. Someone had taken him. A task force was set up, made of 5 different agencies. The investigation was switched from where to who. With the gravity of the situation now finally hitting, Mark was cooperative with the police. His truck and his house were searched, all in an effort to piece together Dylan's last hours before he disappeared. Mark had this to say to local media.
He was the light of my life, and he meant everything to me. And I just want him home just like everybody else does.
But even with Mark cooperating, the search for Dylan was fruitless. Weeks started to go by, turning into months. And then Elaine remembered something she thought may have been relevant. It was about Dylan. In 2011, a year before Dylan disappeared, Mark, Dylan and Corey went on a road trip together. When they were at a motel, Dylan found something on his father's laptop. Realizing that what he was looking at was weird, he woke up his older brother, Corey, and they took the laptop into the bathroom. They locked the door behind them while their father was asleep. They discovered pictures of their father wearing women's underwear and diapers, and eating feces from a diaper. The 2 brothers swore to never speak of it again, and understandably, they tried to erase these images from their brains. By the way, I'm trying to do the same thing. After all, who wants to have an image of their dad eating that? But a year later, a couple of months before he went missing, Big Brother Corey told their dad that they had both seen the pictures, and that he had taken pictures as evidence on his cell phone at the time. This was supposed to be for protection. If he hurt them, they had a counterattack ready. Elaine was now starting to worry that Corey's counterattack had backfired. The search for Dylan continued as winter turned to spring and then to summer. After accusations from his ex-wife and oldest son, Mark Redwine decided to go on Dr. Phil, the talk show, and take a polygraph test. Polygraphs are otherwise known as lie detector tests. They are known to be unreliable and are not admissible in court. Mark offered to take the polygraph test to prove that he had nothing to do with the disappearance of his son, Dylan. But when it came time for the test, Mark asked for a day's delay. Then the next morning, just when a test was getting started, Mark said that he didn't feel well, an automatic disqualifier. Dr. Phil pleaded with him again hours later, but in the end, Mark Redwine decided not to do the test. He never gave a reason, at least not a good one. On the 27th of June 2013, 7 months after he was last seen, Dylan was finally found. Or at least, part of him. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation confirmed that bones that had been found during a search in late June did indeed belong to Dylan Redwine. They were found about 10 miles from Mark's home in a wooded area. When Mark's son from his first marriage called him to give him the news that his youngest son had been found deceased, Mark's alleged response was, "Oh well, you know, happens, right?" Police couldn't find the entire skeleton. They were not able to piece together what had happened from the limited remains. However, there were no signs of obvious trauma and no clues that could have helped investigators.
Well, there are nearly 100 supporters here at Dylan Redwine's prayer vigil. These are the same people that went out into the woods and searched for this 13-year-old for several months. Now that Dylan's remains were found, they want answers. Authorities say there are no suspects in the homicide investigation. They also add both of Dylan's parents have been cooperating. I spoke to both Elaine and Mark Redwine. The two are divorced, and there is clear tension between the two. Supporters of Dylan's mom say they believe that Mark had something to do with Dylan's disappearance. Mark Redwine says his priority is to find all of Dylan's remains and give his son a proper burial.
With only a small portion of his remains being located, it's very important that we find the rest of our son so that we can try to get as much of him as we can, because obviously we want to put him to rest and give him a proper burial.
Mark's theory was that this was an animal attack, a bear, a cougar, or a mountain lion. He said he thought that his son had left the house, gone for a walk, and then gotten eaten. Or maybe a hunter may have accidentally shot him on the side of the mountain, and then they panicked and dumped his body. Dylan's bones were found at a typical dump site. This means a site that's close to a road or access point, or within 50 yards of one. And also the site is downhill from that access point. Mark's hunter theory was unlikely. The mountain was closed to hunters on Thanksgiving. However, the hunter story did seem more realistic than the animal attack.
Do you know where Dylan is? Failed.
Right. Because I believe that his mom had something to do with this.
What's that have to do with, do you know where Dylan
because
is?
the way I interpreted the question, do I know where he's at? I don't know where he's at specifically, but I know that mom has everything
asked that question, don't you think?
Well,
do you know where Dylan is?
I don't know where he's at. I think I know where he's at. That was how I interpreted the question.
Dylan's death was subsequently ruled to be a homicide at this time, but the police were no closer to finding the killer. The case went cold.
We made plans to hang out, and yeah, I was looking forward to it. It was just like a whole 7 months of all this hard work and hope and stuff just shattered. When I was around with Dylan and his father, or when I was around them, they seemed like best friends. I mean, they were really close.
2 years later, Dylan's skull was found, roughly 5 miles from where his bones had been located. Despite the elapsed time, the skull gave the authorities the break in the case that they needed. Dylan had suffered a sharp force injury and a skull fracture, situated above his left eye at or around the time of his death. Mark's first wife, Betsy, would speak to the police, saying Mark had told her, quote, if he ever had to get rid of a body, he would leave it in the mountains. Now, remember when Mark's house was searched at the beginning of the investigation? He was compliant, but he probably shouldn't have been. They found blood in Mark's living room, on the couch, the floor, the coffee table, and on the rug. Mark's girlfriend at the time tried to give a cover story for him, saying that Dylan had cut his finger a year previously in 2011. But now, with the skull found with the injury, doubts were rising. 5 years after Dylan disappeared in August of 2017, Mark Redwine was arrested. He was arrested in Bellingham, Washington, where he had been working as a truck driver. He was charged with second-degree murder and child maltreatment resulting in death. The trial began in 2021. Mark pleaded not guilty. The prosecution argued that the murder of Dylan Redwine was due to the photographs he and his brother had seen. Corey took to the stand and explained that his little brother Dylan wanted to use the photos as leverage in an argument with his father. His father, who was still locked in a contentious custody battle with his mother. In August 2012, Dylan sent a text message to Corey saying, "Hey, send me those poop pics of Papa, because he gave me a speech about you guys being a bad example, and I want to show him who he really is." However, Corey didn't send the pictures, and by the next day it seemed the argument was over. He never found out whether or not Dylan had confronted his father, but the prosecution speculated on the evening of the 18th of November, Dylan brought up the photos and Mark lost it, flying into a fit of rage. They stated that it was most likely blunt force trauma that killed Dylan. They then alleged that Father Mark removed his son's head. The defense, however, went with the animal attack story, but the prosecution was prepared. They had a bear expert explain to the jury hibernation patterns. These patterns said it was extremely unlikely that a bear would have had anything to do with Dylan's passing. After a day of deliberation, Mark Redwine was found guilty of murdering his son. In October 2021, a La Plata County judge sentenced Mark Redwine to 48 years in prison. The judge said, "I have trouble remembering a criminal defendant who has shown such an utter lack of remorse. This leads me to believe that you need significant punishment, and you need to be removed from society for a long period of time." To the making of this video, Mark has never explained what happened that night, behind closed doors, on that fateful day in November 2012. It's fair to say, it's unlikely he ever will. This is the true story of Elizabeth Alton, a funny, excitable and outgoing 9-year-old girl, someone that hadn't yet experienced much of what the world had to offer, and sadly, she never would. When a friend lured her into the woods one day, promising to show her something new and exciting, why did only one of them walk back out? What would become of Elizabeth? Elizabeth Alton was born on December the 15th, 1999. She was the baby of the family, the youngest of her two siblings, Anthony and Stephanie. She was the apple of her mother Patty's eye. The family lived in St. Martins, Missouri, a small town with just over 1,000 people. Everyone knew everyone, and everyone loved Elizabeth. She loved all things theatre and performing, and at just 9 years old had been cast in the big school play. She was excited and was throwing herself into it wholeheartedly. She practiced her lines every day with anyone that would read with her. She would even practice her songs as she walked around town. She really did have her whole life ahead of her. October the 21st, 2009 was a typical Wednesday. Elizabeth and her siblings were back from school and dinner was in the oven. There was chatter and laughter and no sign of anything untoward about the evening. It was just a normal Wednesday. Just after 5 PM there was a knock at the door. Mother Patty answered. She opened the door to 6-year-old Emma, one of Elizabeth's friends. She asked if Elizabeth could come out and play with her. Mother Patty said no, it was a school night and dinner was almost ready. But the girls were relentless with their persuasions. They pleaded, they begged, and they jumped up and down. Patty knew she didn't stand a chance. Patty told Elizabeth she had 1 hour and no more. She wanted her home by 6:15 PM. The girls ran off happily and Patty went back to making dinner. 6:15 PM came and went, but Elizabeth hadn't returned. Friend Emma lived just 4 houses away and she was conscientious. She didn't push boundaries. When Elizabeth still hadn't come home by 6:30 PM, Patty started to worry. Patty called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. She then rang Emma's grandmother Karen, who Emma and her siblings lived with. Karen said she hadn't seen Elizabeth either. In fact, she had no idea that Emma had even knocked at her door that afternoon at all. The sun was setting and there was no way that her Elizabeth would be out voluntarily. She was terrified of the dark. By 7 p.m, police officers were at Patty's house. The police started at Emma's house. Karen and Gary, Emma's grandparents, were distraught, but they didn't have any information. They maintained that Elizabeth had never been there. All they could do was join the search.
The Cole County Sheriff's Department, the Highway Patrol, and even the FBI are desperately trying to find 9-year-old Elizabeth Olten.
Well, I think that the woods possibility is, kids in this area play in the woods, in the farm areas back there.
More than 200 volunteers, including military, housewives, public servants, and construction workers, left their jobs to join in the search.
Contacted my supervisor, asked him if we were going to assist in any way, and he said he was going to ask for some volunteers, so...
Emma said they had been walking through the woodland near their houses. They had been darting in and out of the neighbouring lawns and backyards. She said that an hour later, Elizabeth set off home just as she was instructed to do. Emma said she watched her friend walk off, and that was the last time that she had seen her. Officers couldn't see any evidence that pointed towards foul play. They were more concerned that she'd gotten lost in the woods, an easy thing to do. By 10 p.m, almost a third of the town was out and looking, but the search party eventually had to slow down and stop for the night because of how dark it had gotten. As soon as the sun rose, they were out again in full force. A few hours later, with concern continuing to mount, the FBI was called in to help and they moved quickly to bring Elizabeth home. The search team deployed dive teams, helicopters, and sniffer dogs. All the known offenders in the area were interviewed. The FBI also started looking at Elizabeth's phone activity. She had received a call that afternoon from someone called Alyssa. 6-year-old friend Emma then asked to speak to the police again. She had a new story, but she was scared to tell detectives. She said that her half-sister had been the one to get her to knock on Elizabeth's door that afternoon. Her half-sister was 15-year-old Alyssa Bustamante. Emma said that when the two were outside playing together, Alyssa came and joined them and encouraged Emma to leave them alone. Elizabeth said she had to head home and started to walk off. This timed perfectly with the call that came from Alyssa. Emma walked back to her house and stayed outside playing alone. This left Elizabeth and Alyssa out together and alone. If what Emma was saying was true, she hadn't been the last person to see Elizabeth that day. As far as they now knew, it was actually Alyssa. Meanwhile, a search party in the woods made a strange discovery. A group of volunteers had stumbled upon a huge hole that had been dug up and then covered back over. They alerted the police right away, but strangely there was nothing under the soil. The hole was empty and there was no sign of Elizabeth or anything belonging to her in that area. But detectives had seen a hole like this before. In fact, they discovered more than one. When detectives had been at the Bustamante house talking to Emma, they had noticed several holes in the garden that looked similar in size and shape to this one. With all signs pointing towards a Bustamante house, a warrant was issued to search the home. Everything seemed normal and in order until they entered Alyssa's room. It painted a very troubling and chilling picture. It was in disarray. Everything was everywhere. There was writing all over the walls, one of them reading, "It was written in blood. It was written in blood." Cards from her father, who was in prison, were scattered around the room. Detectives then found Alyssa's diary. One entry read, "If I don't talk about it, I bottle it up, and when I explode, someone's going to die." They also noticed a paragraph that was scribbled over in pen. Fortunately though, investigators were able to uncover some of the original text. To do this, they simply shone a light at it from behind. 2 words stood out: slit and throat. Born in 1994, Alyssa came from a troubled and very broken family. Both of her parents had substance addictions, her father was in and out of prison, and her mother would often leave the home while she spiraled downwards. Eventually, Alyssa and her siblings went to live with her grandparents, Karen and Gary. The couple soon gained full custody of the children. Karen adored Alyssa, and although the children had had a tough life, she did her best to raise them well and be a constant and supportive presence in their lives. As she entered her teenage years, Alyssa started causing harm to herself. She was admitted into a psychiatric hospital. This was after she took an overdose and began to mark words into her arms. Doctors that assessed her described her as being violent and angry. She was diagnosed with severe depression and was prescribed antidepressants. When she was released, things only began to get worse and more concerning. On her various social media platforms, she changed her list of hobbies to killing people and cutting. She often told friends and her boyfriend she wanted to know what it was like to kill someone. She also said that she had a dream of burning down a house with a family still inside it. Alyssa was brought in for a formal interview alongside her grandmother and a juvenile officer. Alyssa started off by recounting her day. She said she had come back from school at around 3:30 p.m. She had then gone for a walk in the forest at around 4:30 to 5 p.m. By this point, detectives knew that Alyssa had actually skipped lessons that day. So pretty much straight away, she was already trapping herself in lies. She said she was supposed to take Hammer, her dog, on a walk, but she decided not to take her as she was annoying. Instead, she walked alone where she saw the two girls. She then returned to the house an hour later. She maintained that she had never been out with Elizabeth on her own. When confronted about her diary entries, the interview would take a drastic turn. Alyssa's demeanour had now changed. She was shaking and quivering. However, she still didn't tell the truth right away. Alyssa now changed her story. She said the pair had been playing out in the forest. Elizabeth had fallen, hit her head, and then died instantly. Now panicked, she had tried to conceal the body by burning it. Given the final page in her diary, detectives knew that this wasn't true. However, this was the start of the truth coming to light. Detectives simply had to keep chipping away and poking holes in her stories. The final entry in her diary that had been scribbled over had now been completely uncovered, and it read as follows: "I just killed someone. I strangled them and slit their throats and stabbed them. Now they're dead. I don't know how to feel at the moment. It was amazing." As soon as you get over the "oh my god, I can't do this" feeling, it's pretty enjoyable. I'm kinda nervous and shaky right now though. Okay, gotta go to church now. LOL. This entry had been written on the same day that Elizabeth had gone missing, October the 21st. When confronted with the diary entry, everything started to unravel. They showed Alyssa her final journal entry. They asked her if Elizabeth's throat had been cut. She said yes, and Karen, Alyssa's grandmother, burst into tears and walked out the room. Alyssa told police that she told her sister to go over and ask Elizabeth to play. Once Elizabeth was lured out of her house, Alyssa told Emma to go home. Alyssa told Elizabeth that she had something to show her, but it would be about a 15-minute walk into the woods. Alyssa was already armed with a kitchen knife while she was holding the hand of 9-year-old Elizabeth. The two girls arrived at a shallow grave. Alyssa had actually dug this hole 5 days before. This was premeditated. She had been planning this for quite some time. Alyssa began throttling Elizabeth. She then grabbed a sharp implement, jabbing at her a total of 7 times in the chest. Alyssa then dragged this same sharp implement across Elizabeth's neck. She then buried Elizabeth and covered her with leaves. Police knew that to be able to find Elizabeth's body, they would need Alyssa to guide them to her. Of course, she knew exactly where Elizabeth was. Alyssa agreed to take police to her remains. She lay just 15 minutes from home, and her body wasn't exactly buried very deep. Some of her body parts were protruding from underneath the leaves. The search for Elizabeth Alton had come to a devastating end. A day after Elizabeth was found, police announced that they had placed the 15-year-old under arrest. Alyssa had been charged with first-degree murder. Police also interviewed Alyssa's boyfriend and asked him to undertake a polygraph test. Although they suspected he likely knew that something had happened, they determined that he didn't have anything to do with the murder of Elizabeth. He wasn't implicated any further. Alyssa had dug 2 graves in the weeks before. She was essentially waiting for the perfect opportunity. It remains undetermined who, if anyone, the second grave was intended for. But police suspected she was actually planning to kill her 2 younger brothers.
Well, by opening the November hearing, the judge will allow the general public to attend the trial as well as keep the suspect in custody. At that certification hearing, Judge Beadham will decide whether to try the 15-year-old suspect as a juvenile or an adult.
Despite her lawyer's efforts to get her a lesser charge on the grounds of a troubled childhood and her age, the judge ruled that Alyssa would be tried as an adult. Alyssa pleaded not guilty and trial preparation got underway. In June 2011, a huge blow came for Elizabeth's family and the prosecution. Alyssa's defense team requested that her lengthy confession should be thrown out. The judge ruled that because of her age and the line of questioning put forward, at least part of her statement would not be admissible in court. Her trial was delayed and set for early 2012. Knowing they were up against it, the prosecution decided to offer Alyssa the option of a plea deal. Therefore, Alyssa withdrew her not guilty plea and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. This spared her the chances of receiving the death penalty. As part of the deal, Alyssa had to recount what had happened that day in all its awful detail. The tension in the courtroom was palpable and everybody was sitting in stunned silence. The defense team heavily relied on Alyssa's childhood, upbringing and mental health issues. They claimed that her prescribed medication made her more prone to violence. Despite this, Alyssa was sentenced to life in prison for second-degree murder and 30 years for armed criminal action. Under Missouri's law, Alyssa may seek parole after 30 years. Alyssa appealed her sentence in 2014, but it was denied. This is the story of Kaylee Haywood, a well-liked, bubbly and funny teenager. Someone that wanted to be loved and to experience new things. So when she got a random friend request, she accepted it readily and jumped headfirst into romance. But the morning after a sleepover, she never returned home. What had become of Kaylee? Kaylee Haywood was a 15-year-old beloved daughter and sister from Measham in Leicestershire. She lived with her mother, Stephanie Haywood, her stepfather Martin Whitby and her siblings. Although they had their issues like any teenager would with a parent, Kaylee was a shining light in her mother's life. She was described by her friends and family as vibrant and innocent, having a spirit of bubbliness and positivity, one that was infectious to all those around her. Making excellent grades in school and having a decent amount of popularity, Kaylee was well liked by pretty much everyone that surrounded her. Like most people her age, she enjoyed hanging out with friends and spending time on her phone. This was something that would prove to be more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. In November of 2015, Kaylee Haywood was enjoying a day at home like any other. Then she received a friend request on Facebook from a man named Luke Harlow. You might think twice before accepting a friend request from a random stranger, but this was before education about safety on the internet was as readily available or as well known as it is now. So without thinking too much about who this man could be, Kaylee accepted the invitation. I think at some stage all of us have given into curiosity like this. She then immediately received a message from the man. He introduced himself as Luke and asked how she was doing. Kaylee replied saying, "Fine, who are you?" After getting introductions out of the way, the two quickly exchanged personal phone numbers. Things quickly escalated and they began texting throughout all hours of the day. It didn't take long for Luke to express how infatuated he was with Kaylee. He complimented her looks and her personality, calling her babe and princess just days after meeting. He detailed how he wished he could be with her forever, so that he would never have to let her go. Kaylee too was infatuated by the way that Luke spoke to her. She had never received that type of undivided attention before, never feeling so loved and desired by anyone. Luke asked Kaylee to be his girlfriend after less than a week of talking, to which the conversation between the two abruptly became intimately charged. Luke talked about wanting to see her in person badly so the two could be a proper couple, making it clear that Kaylee was to keep it as a secret, saying, "I'm much too old for you, and I could get in trouble. People will think it's weird." Luke needed to make sure that Kaylee wouldn't tell anyone about their planned meeting. Kaylee agreed, thinking to herself that no one would understand that he was different from the other guys, that he truly loved her. After all, Luke was 28 years old, 13 years older than Kaylee. Promising her alcohol, laughs, and a romantic getaway, Luke begged Kaylee to visit him, saying, "I could kidnap you and keep you forever." After some persuasion, Kaylee agreed to spend the night at his flat in George Avenue. The date was set, Friday the 13th of November. Kaylee got permission from her parents to stay with a friend for the weekend, having her father drop her off at a nearby community college. From there, Kaylee walked to Luke's flat to enjoy what she thought would be a blissful weekend, safe with a man who had rapidly become the love of her life. Upon arriving, Kaylee was immediately given copious amounts of alcohol by Luke. She became heavily intoxicated. Before long, Luke had engaged in intimate activities with Kaylee. Reminder, he was 28, she was 15. On the morning of Saturday, November the 14th, Kaylee's mother Stephanie received a call from her daughter. She was checking in for the day and letting her know that she would be home soon. After this call, however, Stephanie Haywood would never hear from her daughter again. After Kaylee didn't return home on Sunday morning, her family alerted the police to her disappearance. On that same day, a neighbour of Luke Harlow had found Kaylee's phone in the street, smashed to pieces. Police investigators worked swiftly, finding that Kaylee was in fact not where she said she would be on that Friday night. They were able to recover the text messages from Kaylee's smashed phone, discovering the correspondence between her and Luke Harlow, the 28-year-old unemployed school dropout. They quickly brought him in for questioning. Luke, however, denied knowing anything about her disappearance.
How did you become friends on Facebook? How did that come about?
I can't remember if I added her or she added me. I'm not 100% sure.
According to him, they had fun together on Friday night, but it ended with Luke going to sleep in his bed and Kaylee going to sleep on the sofa. The police knew that Luke was lying, showing them classic signs of deception. His palms were sweaty, he was continuously cracking his knuckles, grabbing and rubbing his own hands, showing the anxiety he felt about this entire situation. Upon pressing him further, Luke admitted to the fact that he had invited someone else to his flat the following night. This was 29-year-old Stephen Beedman. Luke had told Stephen that he had a bird at his house. Bird in the UK is kind of a semi-offensive slang for a female. Luke seemed confident that Stephen wouldn't be alarmed by the fact that he had a teenager sleeping at his house. But why? Any normal person would intervene. Biederman was someone who immediately ignited the concern of the investigators due to his past, putting the pieces together about why Biederman would be delighted to come and visit 15-year-old Kaylee. Upon looking into his history, police had found evidence of an intimate interest in minors, as well as significant anger issues. Even Biederman's family were fearful of him, quoted as being wary of his frequent, rage-filled outbursts. This was a piece of evidence that they couldn't afford to ignore. They brought Stephen in for questioning. When conversing with the police, Biederman stated that by the time he had arrived at Harlow's house, Kaylee was so intoxicated that he couldn't even hold a conversation with her.
We don't know where Kaylee is. We don't know if she's injured somewhere. So tell us right now, at the beginning of the day.
No, I don't.
You don't know where she is?
I don't know where she is. I met her Saturday night at 8. At 7, 8 o'clock. I've only about 4 hours. And she was that drunk, she couldn't even... I couldn't get much conversation out of her.
Despite his testimony, the interviewers couldn't ignore a glaring question that stared back at them. What had happened to Stephen's face? He was covered in deep wounds, ones that looked fresh. When questioned about it, Stephen explained that he had injured himself at work. But the investigators didn't buy this story. They decided to fact-check Stephen's statement. They visited his workplace to see if these claims were true. But they found more than they bargained for. Much to their surprise, the officers found an unlit bonfire at his worksite, along with a plastic bag filled with clothes. Upon further inspection, they were led to believe that these clothes belonged to Stephen, and they were covered in a reddy brown vital fluid. The red fluid on the clothes would be tested, and they would later find that it was a DNA match to Kaylee Haywood. Despite this earth-shattering evidence that they had discovered, the police weren't ready to confront Stephen with this evidence just yet. As they continued their investigation into Stephen's life, they also came across Kaylee's handbag and some of her clothes. Now they had what they needed, and they were ready to question Biederman again.
The 15-year-old schoolgirl has now been missing for 5 days, and police fear she may have been murdered.
As inquiries have been completed, we've become increasingly concerned that she may have come to harm. And today, we have told the family that we are treating her disappearance as a murder inquiry.
Now I feel hopeless.
Do you allow yourself to think that she might not be alive?
A bit. A bit.
This time, confronting him with the evidence, Stephen's story completely changed. According to his new story, an argument had broken out at Luke Harlow's house. This was late on Saturday night, causing Kaylee to storm out.
She's pretty much walking, because I must have scared her. I must have.
So is she resisting you at this point?
No, not when she's walking, no. I honestly can't remember. I've been drinking. We'd all been drinking.
The room remained silent as they waited for Stephen to continue speaking, but he didn't. But what Stephen didn't know at the time was that the investigators knew exactly how false his new story was. In the search for Kaylee, officers had questioned people in the area of Luke Harlow's flat, and they had received some damning eyewitness testimony from a neighbour. According to this neighbour, he had seen Kaylee running frantically from the flat at about 3 in the morning. She was wearing nothing but a t-shirt. Thinking that Stephen Biederman was a police officer, he witnessed him tackle Kaylee to the ground, pinning her in what seemed to be an arrest. Revealing this evidence to Stephen, they asked him again about what had happened that night, and why she ran from the flat in that state.
The issue is, she's run out, possibly,
with her phone, without her trousers, and there's a complete, as you've described, disarray in the flat. The speakers are over.
So there's obviously been a struggle.
Well, that's the implication, but we're asking you if you can explain what's happened.
I honestly cannot explain that.
The investigators, of course, didn't believe a word of it. They continued to press him about the events of that night, saying that Stephen had to remember at least something. Fortunately, this pressure worked. Stephen let a small confession slip out.
So there's obviously been a struggle.
Police saw this as a door opening and the investigators took a chance. After a long, grueling conversation, Beedman finally broke down, confessing to taking Kaylee across the street, attacking her, and ending her life with a brick. The wounds on his face were an emblem of her attempt to fight back. She did the right thing. Stephen blamed his actions on the huge amounts of alcohol that they had been drinking, stating, "When I drink, I just switch. But when I switch, I get violent. I wasn't in full control because I had been drinking."
Yeah, well, I obviously feel bad then.
Why do you feel bad?
Because she's too young.
And what else?
None of the stuff.
What's the other stuff?
After the arrest of both Luke Harlow and Stephen Beedman, Kaylee's body was found in a field on the outskirts of Ibstock. Stephen Beedman was charged with her assault, imprisonment, and the ending of her life. Luke Harlow was charged with grooming, engaging in intimate activities with someone under 16, and false imprisonment. Since they both confessed to their vicious deeds, the trial proceedings were rather simple. Unfortunately though, it never became completely clear exactly what had happened during that Saturday where Kaylee was held captive by Luke and Stephen. Even in court, Harlow denied ever being present during any of the attacks that Stephen made on Kaylee. Even during the time that she was imprisoned in his flat all day and all night on that Saturday, he claimed to be asleep. Despite these differences in testimony and not having a clear picture, Luke Harlow was sentenced to 12 years in prison for his crimes against Kaylee. As for Stephen Beedman, he received life in prison, but Beedman wouldn't serve his sentence for long. He instead passed away in prison from heart complications in April of 2021. The case of Kaylee Hayward sparked a mission on behalf of both her family and Leicestershire Police. The mission was to increase education surrounding internet safety for minors. In 2016, they released a film titled Kaylee's Love Story. This detailed the final 2 weeks of her life. The film highlights how quick and easy it can be for children to be groomed online without them even knowing that it's happening. Its purpose is to protect children and stop another family losing a child in this way.
Jackson County Sheriff's Department, how can I help you, please?
Yes, ma'am. I need to report my daughter missing.
Is she missing or did she run away?
No, she's missing.
And what was she wearing?
She has on a light blue coat, black pants with white stripes.
Okay.
Caitlin, or Katie Coleman, was sweet and kind. She was known for being happy, friendly, and always smiling. She was willing to help people and brighten their day in any way that she could. Mother Angie was a full-time stay-at-home mum, and Father John worked as a machinist in the local copper wire factory. John called Katie his little grease monkey and his best friend. They would work on cars together and bond. The family lived in Crothersville, Indiana, USA. Crothersville was a small town with a population of around 1,500 people. The town was thought of as safe, with parents letting their children go to the shops, the library or bank and run errands alone. Everyone knew everyone, something that gave the residents confidence that even if something should happen, others would intervene. Front doors were left unlocked. People trusted people. It was a real callback to an all-American 1950s community. By the 25th of January 2005, Katie was now 10 years old. She began the day in the same manner as she did every other day. She got up, had breakfast with the rest of her family, and then her father took her to school. Katie couldn't contain her excitement about the pyjama party that was going to take place the following day at Crothersville Elementary School. At around 3 in the afternoon, Katie made her way back home from school. At this point, John was at work and mother Angie was in the kitchen getting dinner ready. Katie, always eager to be of assistance to her mother, volunteered to walk to the nearby dollar store and purchase some toilet paper. The stock at home was getting very low. Angie agreed and handed Katie $1.10. At around 3:15 p.m, Katie left the family home and started her journey. It was only around a block and a half away. Katie had made the trip to the store quite a few times before. This was not a big deal to anyone involved. Katie made it to the dollar store at around 3:40 p.m. and picked up the toilet paper as instructed. She then checked out and started the journey home. At approximately 4 p.m, local residents that knew Katie saw her walking home along the train tracks. Katie, however, didn't come back home when she was expected. Mother Angie initially didn't show any signs of concern when Katie failed to return home right away. After all, she was a well-liked young lady who had a large number of friends who lived in the neighbourhood that she would have passed through on her way back home. Any number of these friends could have stopped Katie to chat or play. That wouldn't be an unusual occurrence. As time drew on, Mother Angie decided to call around all of the friends that lived in the neighbourhood, anyone that could have slowed Katie down on her journey. She began asking if they had seen Katie, but everyone she phoned said that they hadn't. Angie's level of concern now increased. This tight-knit community jumped into action immediately. Angie and another 120 locals began searching for 10-year-old Katie. With so few places that she could have gone, it seemed likely that she would soon turn up. But time drew on with no sign of the young girl. At 7:30 p.m, Father John contacted the police and reported Katie missing.
Jackson County Sheriff's Department, how can I help you, please?
Yes, ma'am. I need to report my daughter missing.
Is she missing or did she run away?
No, she's missing.
And what was she wearing?
She has on a light blue coat, black pants with white stripes.
Okay.
Detective Robert Simpson of the Indiana State Police was first on the scene, initially believing that Katie could just be in a friend's house or even could have run away from home. The search of the local area continued. However, Katie's parents assured the police that Katie would not have run away from home of her own free will. There were no arguments or disputes, and it just wasn't in her nature. They believed that if she could be home, she would be. The huge search team made up of concerned neighbours, family, friends and police forces searched into the night. The train track, playgrounds, shops, bodies of water and anywhere in between were all thoroughly investigated. However, in spite of their efforts, the first night turned up nothing, and then the sun rose on the second day. Now the 26th of January, this was the day that Katie was so desperately excited about. It was the day of the school pyjama party. But instead, police sniffer dogs picked up Katie's scent and traced it to the train tracks before frustratingly losing it. A helicopter hovered overhead, scouring the area, desperately searching for the 10-year-old girl. Katie's family was told some new information by a neighbour. On the day that she vanished, she had gone to their house to tell them that their dog was dead, and that it was situated down by the train tracks. This was the last recorded sighting of Katie at this time. An Amber Alert was not initially issued since there was no indication that a child had been taken from their home. But finally on January the 27th, an Amber Alert was finally issued. Katie's physical characteristics were listed on posters as having chin-length brown hair, brown eyes and standing at a height of 4 feet 6 inches tall. The last time anyone saw her, she was dressed in black tennis shoes and a red shirt, along with black sweatpants with a stripe down the thigh and a medium light blue winter coat. In addition to that, they said that Katie had what was described as a lazy eye.
You just got like 100 million things going through your head. Every time the phone rings, it's like, oh, it's her, it's her.
On January the 29th, there was a breakthrough in the case. A witness told the police that they were confident that they had seen Katie in a suspect's truck. Shortly after, her location could not be accounted for. A composite sketch was generated as a result of this information. The image of the man who was thought to have kidnapped Katie was made public and widely distributed. The male subject was said to have a very slender build. He was Caucasian, between 5 feet 8 inches and 6 feet tall. He was between 18 and 20 years old and had dark hair and pale skin. The witness described the vehicle as a white Ford F-150 pickup truck that appeared to be tidy and well maintained. The witness estimated that the truck was roughly 15 years old. Angie and John submitted a written statement pleading for their daughter's safe return to the family. It read, "Please do not harm her. We ask that you just drop her off anywhere so that she may return to a family and community that loves her very much and misses her dearly."
I can tell you this, we will not stop. The case will never be closed until we come to find the answer.
We're waiting for you to come home, baby. We're trying. We're trying.
19 miles from Katie's house in the Cypress Lake area of Indiana, now 5 days since she was last seen by her family, an Indiana state trooper was searching a wooded area, and there he found the body of Katie. Her wrists had been bound behind her back, her feet were tied together, she had been sexually assaulted and then drowned in the water.
At that point, my whole world just crushed in on me. Not only did I lose my daughter, but I lost my best friend.
Police delved deeper into all of the leads that had been submitted in the investigation so far. Shortly after she was found, they were made aware of a man that lived just a few yards from the dollar store that Katie had walked to. Other residents in the neighbourhood always thought of him as a bit of an eccentric character. Neighbours recalled that he would frequently just stand outside in his yard, staring at nothing, and that he would host parties every single night. In this small community, he stuck out like a sore thumb. This man was 20-year-old Charles or Chucky Hickman. Charles called the police on himself. He then admitted to the police that he had kidnapped Katie along with another male, and he did so for the following reason. As Katie was on her way home from the dollar store, Charles claimed that she inadvertently saw a drug deal between him and Timothy C. O'Sullivan, 22 years old, and to him this was simply a case of she had seen too much. In an effort to prevent her from speaking to or informing anyone of what she saw, he said they tried to frighten her. He claimed that he and O'Sullivan took Katie first to his trailer and then took her to the creek in the middle of the night in order to terrify her into remaining silent about the incident. By now they had bound her hands and feet, and according to Charles, Katie drowned when she accidentally fell into the creek. It seemed that the case was solved, or was it?
I thought, we've got him. We've got the murderer, and he can't live with himself because he's killed a 10-year-old.
The police, on the other hand, quickly realised that Hickman's account of what had occurred with Katie was constantly shifting. Some things just weren't adding up. His inconsistent statements prompted the authorities to do additional research, during which they obtained DNA evidence from the location of the crime. At this time, DNA testing was still in its infancy, and this could take several weeks. DNA was eventually discovered on Katie's body, as well as on a discarded cigarette butt that was located nearby. And thankfully, in early April 2005, there was a match found for the DNA sample when it was entered into the database. But, shockingly, it was not for Hickman or O'Sullivan. The DNA was traced back to a man named Anthony Ray Stockelman. Although Anthony, a father of 2 young sons, was in town visiting his mother on the day that Katie vanished, he himself wasn't from Crothersville. Additionally, he drove a white pickup truck identical to the one a witness claimed to have seen Katie in as a passenger that day. Anthony's prosecution now had a compelling case. They had compared his DNA to samples recovered from Katie's body and the cigarette butt, as well as red carpet fibres from Katie's body and the carpet in Anthony's mother's house. These were a match. After being arrested, Stockelman entered a guilty plea in exchange for having the possibility of the death penalty removed from consideration. On April 17, 2005, Anthony was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. His wife, Tabitha, yelled after her husband as he was being led out of the courtroom, "Why'd you do it, Tony?" The judge had decided that Anthony Stockelman should spend the rest of his life behind bars, and for the crime of molesting Katie, he received an additional 30-year sentence. In a later appeal against the severity of its sentence, Anthony argued that he was suffering from a severe mental or emotional condition at the time of Katie's kidnapping and passing. According to Anthony's testimony, his father passed away 6 months before the incident. He said that he and his father had a close relationship, so when his father was diagnosed with cancer, he was the one that took care of him. He asserted that the loss of his father significantly affected his mental and emotional health. That defense, however, was rejected by the court and his sentence stuck, life without parole and an additional 30 years. However, this was not Anthony's final punishment. Katie's cousin, Jared Harris, was in prison for burglary. He was incarcerated in the same prison and in the same wing as Anthony. Jared took justice into his own hands and formed a plan for an additional punishment for his cousin's killer. On September 22nd, 2006, he broke into Stockelman's cell and hid there as he waited for his opportunity. When Anthony returned, Harris slammed the door behind him, trapping him in the cell. With a DIY prison tattoo machine, he scrawled a permanent reminder on the face of Anthony. The words "Katie's Revenge" are now permanently inked over his forehead. Do you think the punishment fits the crime here? Let me know down in the comments. Join the Dark Case family by hitting subscribe now and turning on notifications. Make sure you like the video to boost the signal of this cautionary tale. Thank you to all my patrons: Rachel David, Kathy Green, David James, Addie Alexander, Karen Jones, Elle Palmieri, James Harrington, Shane Woodward, Faster River, Stacey Krogerus, Summer Chambers and Mona Corona. Be careful out there and I'll see you soon.
Hey, my name is Monica, or Moni, you can call me. I just wanted to post a little video on here about who I am.
Holly Springs police sharing these new photos of a missing woman from Holly Springs. Monica Moynan has not been seen since early April.
For months, Monica Moynan's family believed she was still alive. They texted her almost every day, and somebody always answered. The messages sounded normal. They talked about work, her children, birthday plans, even her training to become a doula. At one point, Monica's sister received a message saying, "It's going great. It's the best thing I've ever done." But according to investigators, Monica had likely already been dead for months by the time that message was sent. Police would later accuse one man of creating an elaborate illusion designed to convince everyone around him that nothing was wrong. An illusion built from text messages, fake social media activity, excuses, manipulation, and fear. Even more disturbing, Monica had been warning everyone that this was going to happen. Before her disappearance, Monica Moynan was trying to build a future for herself. Friends and family described her as energetic, creative, and deeply connected to the people that she loved. She lived in Holly Springs, North Carolina, and worked as a waitress while also running a small side business, selling homemade elderberry syrup online.
Hey guys, I just left the Holly Springs Artisan Market. It was great. I had a really fun time. It was my first time out there, and I'd say it was very successful. I just wanted to say thank you so much to everyone who came out and checked out the market. Thank you to everyone who bought a jar of my syrup and bought some gummies. I hope you guys love it.
At the same time, she had recently started training to become a doula. People close to Monica later said she genuinely seemed excited about it. According to messages later shown in court, she described the training as one of the best things she had ever done. More importantly, Monica was a mother. She had 2 young daughters. Her oldest child, Kaylee, was born in 2015, and her youngest daughter, Nova, was born 3 years later. Much of Monica's life revolved around her kids. Her family later repeatedly rejected the idea that she would ever willingly disappear and leave her children behind, especially without warning. Monica's relationship with Brian Sluss, however, had complicated nearly every aspect of her adult life. The two reportedly met when Monica was still a teenager interviewing for a job at Office Max. Brian was significantly older. Court records later stated that Monica was around 17 years old when they met, while Brian was already in his 30s and married with children. Brian initially lied about his age. Despite her family strongly disapproving of the relationship, Monica eventually moved in with him shortly after turning 18. Within a relatively short period of time, she became pregnant. From the outside, the relationship appeared rocky. They shared children. They lived together on and off. They attempted reconciliation multiple times. But behind the scenes, investigators later uncovered years of DV, manipulation, and fear that had been building long before Monica vanished. And according to the prosecution, by 2019, the relationship had already become extremely dangerous. Years before Monica disappeared, police reports and court records had already documented repeated DV allegations involving Brian Sluss. In May 2016, Monica filed for a DV protective order against him. In the complaint, she described multiple alleged assaults. According to court documents, Monica said Brian had punched her in the head, tackled her, and choked her against a wall. After reviewing the evidence, a judge ruled that there was danger of serious and immediate injury to both Monica and her child. A protective order was granted requiring Brian to stay away from her. But according to investigators, the separation did not last. Police were repeatedly called over the following years for incidents involving the couple. In late 2016, officers responded after reports that Brian was outside Monica's apartment violating the protective order. Then, in January 2017, Monica again contacted police and reportedly said Brian had choked her during another altercation. Monica told officers she feared for her life. Brian was eventually convicted of assault. But even after arrests and protective orders, Monica and Brian continued reconnecting. Co-workers and friends described seeing the physical and emotional effects the relationship was having. One manager from the restaurant where Monica worked later testified that the bruises on Monica's body became increasingly difficult to hide. Another co-worker described Brian physically dragging Monica out of the restaurant during arguments. Witnesses also described Monica becoming fearful of making situations worse if people intervened. One of the most disturbing allegations came from Monica's close friend, Alex Wilson. During trial, Wilson testified that Monica had confided in her about previous strangulation incidents. According to Wilson, Monica described one assault where she believed she was close to losing consciousness. She saw the lights go out, Wilson testified. Monica also reportedly wrote publicly about the relationship in what investigators later called an open letter to evil. In the writing, she described the first time Brian allegedly became violent toward her and described lying on the floor gasping for air while thinking about her child. On April 6, 2019, Monica went out with friends to a tavern in Fuquay Varina. At the apartment, Brian was watching the children. According to investigators, tension between the two was already high that night. Court records later revealed that Brian had been sending Monica increasingly angry text messages while she was out. At one point, he reportedly demanded to know where she was. The messages became more aggressive as the night continued. Eventually, in the early morning hours of April 7th, Monica returned home. Phone records later showed what investigators believe was her final confirmed message. "I'm right outside, smoking a cig." According to prosecutors, Monica was never physically seen or heard from again after arriving home that night. At first, nobody realized anything was wrong. That was partly because Monica's phone remained active. Her family continued receiving messages from her almost immediately afterward. On April 8th, Monica's mother texted asking how she was feeling and what her work schedule looked like. A response came back explaining that Monica was still feeling unwell but was working all week. At the time, nothing about the message immediately seemed suspicious, but investigators would later argue something important had already changed forever. The real Monica was no longer sending those texts. Another detail investigators later focused on was the sudden silence between Monica and Brian's phones. According to testimony presented during trial, Brian had previously texted Monica excessively. Constant contact had reportedly become part of the relationship dynamic. But after April 7th, the messages from Brian to Monica stopped entirely. To investigators, that detail mattered, because if Monica had voluntarily disappeared, why would Brian suddenly stop trying to contact her? At the same time, Monica's normal routines also abruptly ended. She stopped going to work. She stopped using her credit cards. She stopped grocery shopping. She stopped contacting friends directly. And perhaps most importantly, she stopped speaking to her children's grandparents in person or over the phone. Only text messages remained. And over the following months, those messages would convince Monica's family that she was still alive. For nearly 4 months after Monica disappeared, her family unknowingly continued communicating with someone pretending to be her. The deception was detailed enough that it delayed serious alarm for weeks. The messages discussed everyday life. At one point, Monica's sister received texts about doula training. "It's going great," the message said. "It's the best thing I've ever done." Other conversations discussed birthday celebrations and household problems. One message even mentioned concern that a missing cat might upset Monica's oldest daughter. To Monica's family, these details made the conversations feel authentic. That was what made the situation so psychologically disturbing later on. The messages were not dramatic. They were ordinary, and according to investigators, that was intentional. Over time, however, Monica's mother, Melanie Tucker, began noticing small changes. Monica no longer answered phone calls. There was always an excuse explaining why they could not meet in person. Sometimes she was sick and sometimes she was busy. At first, Melanie tried to rationalize it. Families become busy. Young parents become overwhelmed. But something about the situation gradually began feeling wrong. Then came the moment that changed everything. In July 2019, Melanie spoke with the manager of Monica's apartment complex. During the conversation, the manager casually mentioned something deeply alarming. She had not physically seen Monica since late March or early April, yet Brian had continued appearing at the apartment regularly. That realization immediately shattered the illusion. A welfare check was requested. Soon afterward, Monica was officially reported missing. As investigators started piecing events together, the scale of the alleged deception became clearer. Police discovered that Brian had possession of Monica's phone. He was also driving her car. According to prosecutors, he had even used Monica's social media accounts to create the appearance she was still alive and active online. Investigators later said Brian admitted to impersonating Monica in text conversations. But his explanation immediately raised more questions. Brian claimed Monica had become addicted to Brown and voluntarily disappeared after he attempted to help her through withdrawal at home. He claimed he pretended to be Monica because he did not know how to explain the situation to her family. But investigators quickly noticed inconsistencies. In later interviews, Brian reportedly changed parts of the story. At one point, he allegedly admitted Monica did not really have a serious substance problem and instead described her as depressed. Meanwhile, Monica's family strongly rejected the narrative entirely. They insisted Monica would never willingly abandon her daughters. Investigators also began comparing Monica's behavior before and after April 7th. Before that date, her internet activity reflected her actual life. Searches related to doula work, parenting, and things like that. But afterward, according to prosecutors, the phone activity changed dramatically. There were searches for adult content, activity linked to dating sites, and purchases prosecutors argued were connected to Brian rather than Monica. The picture investigators began building was chilling. According to the prosecution, Monica had not disappeared gradually over months. She had vanished in a single night. Everything afterward had allegedly been manufactured to delay discovery. And perhaps the most disturbing part was how effective the deception had initially been. Because for months, Monica's own family believed they were still speaking to her every single day. Once Monica was officially reported missing, police began looking closely at the apartment she shared with Brian. Investigators found Brian's behavior increasingly difficult to explain. He never filed a missing persons report. He was still driving Monica's car. He still possessed her phone. And according to police, he gave multiple conflicting statements about what had happened. But the most significant discoveries came from inside the apartment itself. Investigators noticed signs that parts of the kitchen floor may have been cleaned unusually thoroughly. According to search warrant documents, chemical testing revealed indications of blood on the tiles. When officers removed sections of flooring, they discovered blood underneath the cracks between the tiles. Testing later strongly indicated the DNA belonged to Monica. Investigators also focused on several additional details they believed pointed toward a cleanup attempt. Children's ABC playmats inside the apartment appeared to have been replaced. According to prosecutors, surveillance footage and purchase records later showed Brian buying replacement mats with cash shortly after Monica vanished. Curtains inside the apartment had reportedly also been changed during the same general period. Police seized drains, sink traps, flooring material, journals, and numerous other household items while processing the scene. At the same time, investigators began reconstructing Monica's final known timeline. Phone records showed she had returned home during the early morning hours of April 7th. After that point, nobody could confirm physically seeing or hearing from her again. Another witness statement added even more suspicion. A neighbor reported seeing Brian moving large black trash bags in and out of the apartment during the early morning hours, several days after Monica disappeared. Investigators never publicly confirmed exactly what they believed happened inside the apartment. And because Monica's body was never recovered, many of the precise details remain unknown. But prosecutors argued the forensic evidence, combined with the history of violence and the elaborate impersonation scheme, all pointed toward the same conclusion. Monica had not voluntarily disappeared. According to the prosecution, she had been killed inside that apartment. Police also expanded their investigation beyond Brian himself. Attention eventually shifted toward his ex-wife, Jarlyn Sluss. Investigators discovered that communication between Brian and Jarlyn dramatically increased immediately after Monica vanished. According to authorities, Jarlyn allegedly helped maintain the deception. Police later claimed she impersonated Monica during communication with the apartment manager. Investigators also recovered Monica's identification documents and photographs from property connected to Jarlyn. Eventually, Jarlyn was arrested on obstruction and accessory charges connected to the case.
Yeah, Mari, it's definitely a sense of relief, but understandably, Monica's family tells me this week has been a roller coaster of emotions for them. They are hopeful, though, that this arrest is bringing them one step closer to getting answers because they still don't know where Monica is, and they're looking for justice.
I would describe Monty as a powerful presence.
A beloved mother.
We saw a bright future in the horizon for her.
Daughter.
She was so passionate, so fun to be around, so hilarious. She was a go-getter.
And sister, Monica Moynan.
She was taken way too soon.
The 23-year-old mom of two was reported missing last July. This week, her ex-boyfriend charged with her murder, bringing a sense of relief to her family, but they still need answers.
Outside of Monty being taken from us, of course, the biggest challenge I feel like has been up till now simply not knowing where she is and not having any form of, justice.
Monty hasn't been seen since April 2019, but her mother, Melanie, was still receiving daily texts. Court documents reveal it was Monty's ex, Brian Sluss, sending those messages.
It was strange because I was talking to Monica's phone via text that day, like many, many other days we did. And so I had no idea that I was not talking to Monica. I just knew in my gut, I knew something was terribly wrong.
Since Monica's disappearance, her parents have been raising her two daughters, 4-year-old Kaylee and 1-year-old Nova.
Everything she ever wanted was for those kids to live a really great life. I think that was her total motivation in everything that she did.
And Monty's spirit lives on through her girls.
Kaylee is, very outgoing, and that was Monty to a T when she was that age, absolutely. And Nova is the thinker. They know all about their mother, and they always will. We lost the greatest thing that you can lose. So, but we're happy that we can finally see justice on the horizon.
In May 2020, Brian Sluss was arrested and charged with Monica Moynan's murder. The case immediately drew major attention because Monica's body had still never been found. Historically, murder cases without a recovered victim can be difficult to prosecute. But prosecutors believed the evidence surrounding Monica's disappearance was overwhelming. The state also relied heavily on something called Brittany's Law. The North Carolina law allows prosecutors to pursue first-degree murder charges in cases involving prior domestic violence convictions against the same victim. And in Brian's case, there was already extensive documented history involving Monica, protective orders, police reports, and prior convictions. Over the course of the trial, prosecutors presented a picture of escalating behaviors, followed by what they described as an elaborate cover-up. Jurors heard testimony from Monica's family, friends, co-workers, investigators, and law enforcement officers. They also learned about the months of fake text conversations allegedly sent from Monica's phone after her disappearance. Perhaps one of the prosecution's strongest arguments centered around Monica's children. Prosecutors repeatedly argued that Monica would never voluntarily abandon them, especially without speaking to them directly again. Brian took the stand in his own defense during the trial. He admitted to impersonating Monica through text messages and social media posts, but he continued insisting that he never killed her. Instead, he claimed Monica voluntarily left after struggling emotionally and allegedly dealing with substance problems too. Jurors also saw disturbing footage recovered during the investigation, showing Brian maltreating a child inside the home. Prosecutors argued the footage demonstrated his capacity for violence and intimidation. Meanwhile, Monica's family sat through weeks of testimony, describing the relationship that had consumed much of her adult life. For them, one reality overshadowed everything else. Their beloved Monica was still missing. Wake County Assistant District Attorney Catherine Pomeroy later admitted publicly that one of her greatest regrets was never being able to recover Monica's remains for the family. Still, prosecutors believed the evidence was enough, and apparently the jury agreed very quickly. After approximately 1 hour of deliberation in April 2022, Brian Sluss was found guilty of first-degree murder involving DV. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole.
Madam Clerk, will you announce the verdict?
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, your foreperson has returned a verdict in case number 20 CRS 866, the state of North Carolina versus Brian Sluss. We, the jury, by unanimous verdict, found the defendant, Brian Sluss, to be guilty of first-degree murder involving domestic violence. This is signed by your foreperson this 28th day of April 2022.
Ladies and gentlemen, if this is a unanimous verdict, would you each raise your hand just so I can do a quick head count, make sure this is a unanimous verdict? Let the record reflect 12 jurors have raised their hand. Counsel, is there anything further that we require of this jury?
Members of Monica's family cried and embraced each other inside the courtroom as the verdict was read. Monica's mother later described Brian as a predator who manipulated and destroyed lives around him. Her stepfather described the eternal hole left behind by Monica's disappearance.
And the Holly Springs police chief says that's why there won't be 100% closure, even with the conviction. That department was intimately involved with this case. About 6 of the detectives testified here during the 2-week trial.
We finally got justice for Monica.
The pain's still raw 3 years after Monica Moynan's death.
I loved her very much. She was a vibrant force. She was magnetic. Her energy was very strong.
Moynan's ex-boyfriend, Brian Sluss, was sentenced to life in prison for first-degree murder for the Holly Springs detectives working the case.
Over the last 3 years, have really put their hearts and souls into this case.
Chief Paul LaCorey says the case has taken an emotional toll on the detectives who gathered evidence like photographs in the apartment that were out of place to noticing a change in Moynan's social media patterns. All part of prosecutors' argument that Sluss killed Moynan and tried to cover it up for months. Investigators also found blood in Moynan's kitchen tiles, determining it was hers after a DNA analysis from her mother and daughter. Moynan's body was never found.
It's the hope that one day we will find her and bring her remains home, but also knowing that day may never happen. There is only one person in this world who can provide the information to achieve that goal, and that one man is Brian Sluss.
Do you believe that's the only way we're going to know where the body is?
I think we've exhausted all of our investigative efforts at this point.
After 3 years of investigating, from using receipts to show shopping habits changed on April 7th, 2019, to executing search warrants just 2 weeks ago,
there is somewhat of a closure, knowing that they've done everything that they possibly could do to try and find that. And I think they're comforted that their investigation has led to a successful prosecution and a conviction for first-degree murder.
But even after the conviction, one devastating reality remained unchanged. Nobody has any idea where Monica actually is. Thank you so much for watching. I'm uploading daily true crime and dark content here on this channel, so make sure that you're subscribed, hit like on the video, and also drop a comment so you get shown more of my stuff. Please do be careful out there, and I'll see you tomorrow.